the Honor Guard subcompact 9mm pistol from Honor Defense. This is a new company and a new gun, and it is made in the USA. There's absolutely no doubt that it is going after the M&P Shield, probably by extension going after the Glock 43, and also the Walther PPS, specifically the M2. Not to mention a few others, but certainly those guns are definitely in the sights of the Honor Guard. And speaking of sights, check these guys out. We have a 3-dot configuration. Let me move this box out of the way. This is the cardboard box that it comes in. Very simple packaging. It's a 3-dot combat sight configuration. Looks like decent sights. There's a U notch instead of a square notch in the back. You have your 2 white dots that are fairly large, and this very, very visible orange dot on the front sight. They are not night sights, so in the dark they are dark, but in any kind of ambient light, I mean, this is just, you know, workbench light. that orange dot glows like crazy. I mean, you can see it reflecting off the top of the slide. It's a thin gun. It's a small gun. Again, it is very, very M&P Shield sized. Also, very Walther PPS sized. So that's what we're dealing with here. That's obviously the market that these guys are going after. There's some interesting features about this gun. I've handled it a bit. I have not shot it, of course, yet, but I've come up with a few observations and opinions so far, but I'm going to try to withhold most of those until I'm actually shooting the gun, because sometimes that can make a big difference. My very first observation was, what's the name of this gun again? What do they call this thing? If I could only find it. Oh, there it is. Honor Guard. Yeah. I don't know. I don't care that I know some people probably really hate how giant that is. It is kind of like a billboard. Yeah, I think it would probably look a little less tacky if it were smaller, but I honestly don't care. The very next thing I noticed was this grip texture. This grip texture is quite unique. It's an approach that I've not seen anybody else take, certainly not in a production gun. One thing I noticed right away about the rear sight is, if you're used to Novak style sights, if you're used to M&P type sights, you're probably going to go, hey, they've got the sight on backwards. Well, actually I think they have the sight on the right way. It's an anti-snag design, and it's designed not to snag when it's moving backwards. When a gun's moving backwards, it means it's being drawn, and that certainly would be the worst time for your gun to snag. I know a lot of them put these low wedge to the front rear sights, and they say that's anti-snag. I said, well, I don't really care if it snags going into the holster. You know, I don't want it to snag coming out. So that's smart. That's a good design. But you do have a nice angle and flat surface at the front of the rear sight. So if you wanted to use that rear sight to run this slide with a one-handed operation, I don't think you'd have any trouble doing that. The sights are metal in construction. Front sight is screwed on with a post from underneath, and the rear sight is drifted into a dovetail. So you could adjust the rear sight somewhat for windage, but not for elevation. It is a striker-fired gun. The controls are ambidextrous. You have slide stop and magazine release on both sides. Comes with 2 magazines. Comes with a 7-round flat base plate and an 8-round extended base plate magazine. Most likely you'd want the 7-round for concealed carry, and you want the 8-round as your backup magazine. It's got an interesting design with the slide serrations. They wrap around the top of the slide. I'll talk more about that later. I'm going to talk more about these slide serrations in general later. I'm not going to say anything about them now. I want to get the gun out to the range and I want to shoot it. Because my first impressions when I hold a gun at the workbench often change when I get it out to the range and shoot it. So here is our first look at the Honor Guard. It's available in 2 styles. The style you see here is just the subcompact regular. There's another one, I'm not sure, I forget now what they call it. I apologize. I call it the Bubba Gump version because it's got the protruding, very protruding lower lip. And that's one where the grip frame extends the length of the slide by, looks to me, maybe an inch or so. There are plenty of pictures available. I may throw one right here so you can see what that looks like. But it is designed with the idea that if you needed to do a contact shot, it prevents a misfire or prevents a short cycle of your slide so that the next round can be chambered and come fully into battery for the next shot. So that's the purpose, that's the thought behind that. It's certainly an odd looking bird. So we're going to just take a look at the regular subcompact. The gun has no external safety. The gun has no trigger safety. The trigger pull is fairly heavy. I haven't measured it yet. I'm going to wait till probably after I shoot at least 100 rounds through it, but it feels like it's an 8-pound trigger. It is, again, striker fired, so we'll call it double action only. So there it is. It's an interesting gun. It's good to see people entering the market. I like the idea of competition. I like the idea of innovation. So I applaud that. So let's get this thing out to the range, get 100 rounds through it, see if we can come up with our opinion about what kind of job they've done. Okay, for the first 100 through the Honor Guard from Honor Defense, going to be a box of Remington UMC and a box of Herders Select. This pistol is remarkably similar to the one I happen to be wearing on my hip, which is the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. These two guns are very close. We know which one came first, so we know who's emulating who, and that's how I'm going to judge it. I'm going to judge the Honor Guard against the M&P Shield. This is not going to be a comparison video. There will be one, don't worry, down the road in the very near future, but a lot of my opinions of this gun are going to be based on what I think about this gun and just how it compares, because it is competing directly. And I paid more for the Honor Guard than I did for the M&P Shield, so he's not going to get any kind of slack for being cheaper or easier to obtain or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give it a first 100. I'm going to tell you what I think as we go, and we'll take it from there. Let's load it up. Let's start out with the Herders. We have a 7-round magazine and an 8-round magazine that come with the pistol. It is a compact, actually a subcompact, personal defense gun. So you're not going to find a 30-round magazine for it anytime soon. So, you know, a 7-rounder and an 8-rounder is what you get with it. And speaking of getting with it, let's get with it. Okay, here we go. Very first rounds through the Honor Guard. 9mm subcompact, slim single stack. Competitor to the M&P Shield. I am at 10 yards. I'm going to go for a 1-inch black square. So that should be a good enough test. I've got a camera on that target so you can see what I see, only you can see it better. Caught myself in a flinch. Alright, so that was one magazine. That was the flush mount magazine. Now I've got the extended magazine. That's only a 1-round difference, so that was 7. This is 8. I do like the sight picture. Got that big orange ball out front. U-shaped rear notch. Not a whole lot of extra airspace, which I like, between the sight blades. Hey, so far not bad. This 2 magazines down, so that's what, 15 rounds? First 15 rounds felt good. The very back of the grip tang right there sort of bumps my knuckle a little bit. Some pistols do, some don't. You know, it's a weird thing. But man, that first batch felt good. Let's load these magazines up and go some more. That's the thing I hate about single stacks. You spend a lot of time loading magazines. Continuing on, Honor Guard 9mm single stack self-defense gun, 10 yards, 1-inch target. Trigger feels a little gritty. It's not a bad trigger. It's heavy, but not any more so than a self-defense gun should be. I'll measure it later, but there's a little hitch in it, you know, about midway point. Just feels like a rough spot in the trigger linkage or trigger bar or something. Not bad, but I don't know. Continue to evaluate it as I shoot it. I like the sights. It's a good sight picture. They are big and basic, like the Roy Clark Big Note songbook. I don't know how they'd be in the dark. Dark, I suppose. The grip texture, as I suspected, is awesome. By the way, I'll show it to you closer, but the holster that I've got this gun in is the Alien Gear outside the waistband holster, that new one. It is for the M&P Shield. This gun fits that holster perfect. Not a little bit, perfect. Okay, back at it, having some fun with the Honor Guard 9mm single stack M&P Shield wannabe. We'll see if it is. Going up top to the head. I'm holding with that black square right on top of my front sight. So at 10 yards, it's shooting a little bit high. So it definitely likes a 6 o'clock hold. So I'm going to drop my picture a little bit, just a tiny bit. So we can keep them all on paper. Haven't made up my mind yet about the trigger. I'm not sure quite exactly what to think about the trigger yet, but it's a very wide trigger and it's smooth faced. It's got some curve to it, but it feels pretty square, pretty flat. But the thing I'm really noticing about this trigger is that the shape of it pretty much forces your finger downward to where you're riding the bottom of the trigger guard. That starts to get a little bit annoying, especially on a hot day like today. My finger starts to get a little bit sweaty and that skin wants to grab onto that. So I actually have to work to keep my finger up on the trigger without it going down and rubbing that trigger guard. And again, it's just the shape of the trigger just pushes your finger downward, causes it to do that. Average 5 pulls, 6 pounds, 9.5 ounces. That's not bad. Moving on now to Remington Umc. UMC, of course, for upper middle class. Shooting the Remington upper middle class. Still at 10 yards, I have freshened the target. If you like dropping the slide with the slide stop, slide release, nope, not on this gun. It's just a slide stop, not a slide release. It is ambidextrous, so it's it's useless for both hands. Well, hey, there's three guns that look pretty darn similar side by side. Three guns with almost the exact same shape, size, and footprint. The honor guard is in the middle. On this side is the Walther PPS M2. We'll talk more about him later at another time. On this side, the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. We'll talk a little bit more about him right now, but only a little bit. There will be future comparisons because it's just so obvious to do it between probably all three of these. Might even add in some more, but definitely between these two. If you took a piece of paper and traced both of these handguns on the piece of paper and then gave someone each of them, I doubt very many people could tell the difference between the Honor Guard and the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. Maybe not even the employees of each of those companies. They are that close in every dimension. Look at that. In fact, the Honor Guard is a tiny bit longer, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Height is exactly the same. Width looks to be exactly the same. The only real difference you can see is the shape of those triggers right there. See that? I'll talk a minute about trigger. But these two guns definitely beg comparison. I mean, look at that. That is definitely the sincerest form of flattery. So what do I think after 150 rounds that I put through this gun so far? I think that the folks at Honor Defense are onto something. I think they've got a product here worth keeping after. They've got some improvements to make, the most notable of which is the trigger. The trigger needs a little bit of work. It's got some problems. It's not horrible. It's not god-awful. I have shotguns with a lot worse triggers. And, you know, this is by no means a deal-breaker trigger, but it could use some work. The first thing about it is the geometry of the trigger. It's a little, it almost looks like it wants to be a straight trigger, but it's not. But that gentle curve throws my finger down and makes it rub against the bottom of the trigger guard, creates a pinch point right underneath the toe of that trigger. I found that to be occasionally uncomfortable, and it made me think about it all the time, trying to keep my finger up higher, and I had to work to do that. That's not natural. Your finger wants to naturally be pushed down to the bottom. The trigger is a little on the wide side and a little on the flat side. It's got some curve to the face, which is a smooth face, but it's a little bit wide and just feels a little tiny bit awkward. If that was a slightly narrower trigger with maybe more curvature to the front, that would be a lot more comfortable. And lastly, mechanically, it's got a bit of a mid-stroke hitch when you pull the trigger. But then what I really noticed was on the reset, let me come back slow. Hopefully you can hear this. Did you hear that tiny little click? Well, that's a false reset because you're not there yet. See? Right there. Not there. You've got to go one more. There we go. Now we've reset. So I found that when I was shooting slow, I found that a little bit annoying. Magazine releases are excellent buttons, but they don't work all that terribly great. I find it's a lot easier to use my index finger on the opposite side. They are ambidextrous controls, as I mentioned. The grip is absolutely phenomenal. I love this grip a lot. This is maybe the most innovative grip pattern and texture that I've ever felt on a handgun out of the box from the factory. It is absolutely incredible. Whoever did that, whoever came up with that idea, needs a promotion. Magazine is exactly the Smith & Wesson Shield magazine with a couple small differences. I'll talk about that when I do a comparison between the two guns. Everything else worked pretty good. I didn't have any kind of problems. I found the sight picture to be good. The cocking serrations are a little on the smooth side, a little bit harder to grasp. Probably they'll say that that's for, anti-snag purposes. Well, this is one place where I actually do want to snag. When I grab a hold of this with a sweaty hand, I want that to stick. Not bad. I didn't experience any problems. I never had the slide slip out of my hands or anything like that. So no issues there. Just sort of a preferential note. I will show this in comparison to the Shield. This is Alien Gear outside the waistband holster, their new cloak mod. Made for the Shield. That's how I ordered it, for the M&P Shield. Of course, the Shield fits perfect. So does the Honor Guard. Because it's exactly the same. So, if you've got a Shield and you're thinking about trying an Honor Guard, here's the good news. All your gear is going to work. Bad news is your magazines won't. Real quickly, let me show you how you field strip this gun. Push the slide all the way back and lock it. Remove the magazine. Turn your takedown lever clockwise to its 90-degree position, and then just release the tension on your slide lock. No need to touch the trigger. Slide comes right off. No trigger pull required. So that's a good thing. Most people will like that. Some people demand that. I did notice some pretty noticeable wear, and I put on my optivisor and looked at it under heavy magnification, and there is metal being eaten away in a couple spots here. And after 150 rounds, that makes me wonder, how many, a couple thousand rounds, what's that going to do to this part? How's that going to start to affect performance? Inside the slide, it looks a lot like an M&P, but a little different. Your firing pin safety is a different type of configuration. Has a dual recoil spring guide rod assembly, telescoping, as we're used to. And that's about it. Pretty straightforward stuff. The inside mechanisms are very much different from the Smith & Wesson M&P. So they may have borrowed a lot of design cues in the exterior of the pistol and the footprint of it and all that, but they did not steal the technology. That's very different inside. So there we go. That is the first 150 through the Honor Guard from Honor Defense, 9mm, single stack, slim, self-defense handgun. You're going to see it again because I'm definitely going to get it out and compare it to the M&P Shield. I might compare it to the PPS, and I might compare it to a couple other things, like maybe a Glock 43.